Super excited to be talking to you guys today. I this is the first time I'm doing a live video stream on my computer like this, and I'm hoping that this will end up getting saved to my YouTube channel here as well. I am not sure how this is gonna go, but let's see. My name is Brandon, as you guys probably know, and I'm reading this book, Shamanism, a reader for my uh, class called Modern Shamanism. And chapter 2 of this book is this seems really fascinating. So, just for anybody who's interested, although this might not be everybody's cup of tea, I want to have this out there on the web so it can exist. Chapter 2 is of a guy named Michael Harner who pretty much goes out into the wilderness of Peru, and he finds these people, or not finds, but he talks to these people as an anthropologist normally does, uh, about trying to understand their culture, trying to understand specifically their religious beliefs, their shamanic beliefs, and everybody's pretty much nervous about talking to him until they tell them and they say, if you want to understand a little bit more about our religion, you have to go on a trip, or you have to go on a journey, uh, by drinking this drink called ayahuasca. And so this chapter is just pretty much about his uh, internal journey after he takes this potion essentially, and it's wild so far. I only got about 2 pages into the story before I just shut the book and I said, I don't care what happens. I'm recording this. So yeah, here we go. I am your host, by the way. I should probably say hi. This is my face. Um, I'm still playing around with this. As you can probably see in my room, it's kind of a mess, but it's my mess, and I'll deal with it. So let's just kind of get on way, and I'll also be throwing this visual, so at least you guys can maybe have some fun here. Maybe it's not for everybody. Maybe this is a little too new age, but I feel like it kind of fits with the story here. This is the book I'm reading from, so don't judge me. I'm reading from a book here. You're going to be enjoying my book reading. Okay, Michael Harner, Discovering the Way. My first prolonged field work as an anthropologist took. This is also going to help me read through everything, so bear with me. My first prolonged field work as an anthropologist took place in 1956 and 1957 on the forested eastern slopes of the Ecuadorian Andes among the Jibaro Indians, or Unsuri Shuar. The Jibaro were famous at that time for their now essentially vanished practice of head shrinking, and for their intensive practice of shamanism, which still continues. I successfully collected a great deal of information, but remained an outside observer of the world of the shaman at that time. A couple of years later, the American Museum of Natural History invited me to make a year-long expedition to the Peruvian Amazon to study the culture of the Conibo Indians of the Ucayali River region. I accepted, delighted to have an opportunity to do more research on the fascinating upper Amazon forest cultures. That field work took place in 1960 and 1961. Two particular experiences I had among the Conibo and the Jibaro were basic to my discovering the way of the shaman in both those cultures, and I would like to share them with you. Perhaps they will convey something of the incredible hidden world open to the shamanic explorer. I had been living for the better part of the year in a Conibo Indian village beside a remote lake off of a tributary of the Rio Ucayali. My anthropological research on the culture of the Conibo had been going well, but my attempts to elicit information on their religion met with little success. The people were friendly, but reluctant to talk about the supernatural. Finally, they told me that if I really wished to learn, I must take the shaman's sacred drink made from ayahuasca, the soul vine. I agreed, with both curiosity and trepidation, for they warned me that the experience would be very frightening. The next morning, my friend Thomas, the kind elder of the village, went into the forest to cut the vines. Before leaving, he told me to fast, a light breakfast, and no lunch. He returned midday with enough ayahuasca vines and leaves of the kawa plant to fill a 15-gallon pot. He boiled them all afternoon until only about a quart of dark liquid remained. This he poured into an old bottle and left to cool until sunset, when he said we would drink it. The Indians muzzled the dogs in the village so that they could not bark. Noise of barking dogs could drive a man who had taken ayahuasca mad, I was told. The children were cautioned to be quiet, and silence came over the small community with the setting of the sun. As the brief equatorial twilight was replaced by darkness, Thomas poured about a third of the bottle into a gourd bowl, and gave it to me. All the Indians were watching. I felt like Socrates amidst his Athenian compatriots, accepting the hemlock. It occurred to me that one of the alternate names people in the Peruvian Amazon gave ayahuasca was the Little Death. I drank the potion quickly. It had a strange, slightly bitter taste. I then waited for Thomas to take his turn, but he said that he decided not to participate after all. They had me lie down on the bamboo platform under the great thatched roof of the communal house. The village was silent, except for the chirping of crickets and the distant calls of a howler monkey deep in the jungle. As I stared upward into the darkness, faint lines of light appeared. They grew sharper, more intricate, and burst into brilliant colors. Sound came from far away, a sound like a waterfall, which grew stronger and stronger until it filled my ears. Just a few minutes earlier, I had been disappointed, sure that the ayahuasca was not going to have any effect on me. Now the sound of rushing water flooded my brain. My jaw began to feel numb. Now the sound of rushing water flooded my brain. My jaw began to feel numb, and the numbness was moving up to my temples. Overhead, the faint lines became brighter, and gradually interlaced a form of canopy resembling a geometric mosaic of stained glass. The bright violet hues formed an ever-expanding roof above me. Within the celestial cavern, I heard the sound of water grow louder, and I could see dim figures engaged in shadowy movements. My eyes seemed to adjust to the gloom. The moving scene resolved itself into something resembling a huge funhouse, a supernatural carnival of demons. In the center, presiding over the activities and looking directly at me, was a gigantic, grinning crocodilian head, from whose cavernous jaws gushed a torrential flood of water. Slowly the waters rose, and so did the canopy above them, until the scene metamorphosized into a simple duality of blue sky above and sea below. All creatures had vanished. Then, from my position near the surface of the water, I began to see two strange boats wafting back and forth, floating through the air towards me, coming closer and closer. They slowly combined to form a single vessel with a huge dragon-headed prow, not unlike that of a Viking ship. Set amidships was a square tail. Gradually, as the boat gently floated back and forth above me, I heard a rhythmic swishing sound and saw that it was a giant galley with several hundred oars moving back and forth in cadence with the sound. I became conscious, too, of the most beautiful singing I have ever heard in my life, high-pitched and ethereal, emanating from myriad voices on board the galley. As I looked more closely at the deck, I could make out large numbers of people with the heads of blue jays and the bodies of humans, not unlike the bird-headed gods of ancient Egyptian tomb paintings. At the same time, some energy essence began to float from my chest up into the boat. Although I believed myself to be an atheist, I was completely certain that I was dying, and that the bird-headed people had come to take my soul away on the boat. While the soul flow continued from my chest, I was aware that the extremities of my body were growing numb. Starting with my arms and legs, my body slowly began to feel like it was turning to solid concrete. I could not move or speak. Gradually, as numbness closed in on my chest, toward my heart, I tried to get my mouth to ask for help, to ask the Indians for an antidote. Try as I might, however, I could not marshal my ability sufficiently to make a word. Simultaneously, my abdomen seemed to be turning to stone, and I had to make tremendous effort to keep my heart beating. I began to call my heart my friend, my dearest friend of all, to talk to it, to encourage it to be with all the power remaining on my command. I became aware of my brain. I felt, physically, that it had become compartmentalized into 4 separate and distinct levels. At the uppermost surface was the observer and commander, which was conscious of the condition of my body, and was responsible for the attempt to keep my heart going. It perceived, but purely as a spectator, the visions emanating from what seemed to be the nether portions of my brain. Immediately below the topmost level, I felt a numbed layer, which seemed to have been put out of commission by the drug. It just wasn't there. The next level down was the source of my visions, including the soul boat. Now, I was virtually certain I was about to die. As I tried to accept my fate, an even lower portion of my brain began to transmit more visions and information. I was told that this new material was being presented to me because I was dying, and therefore safe to receive these revelations. These were the secrets reserved for the dying and the dead, I was informed. I could only very dimly perceive the givers of these thoughts. Giant, reptilian creatures reposing sluggishly at the lowermost depths of the back of my brain, where it met the top of the spinal column. I could only vaguely see them in what seemed to be gloomy, dark depths. Then they projected a visual scene in front of me. First, they showed me the planet Earth as it was eons ago, before there was any life on it. I saw an ocean, barren land, and a bright blue sky. Then black specks dropped from the sky by the hundreds and landed in front of me on the barren landscape. I could see that the specks were actually large, shiny black creatures with stubby pterodactyl-like wings and huge whale-like bodies. Their heads were not visible to me. They flopped down, utterly exhausted from their trip, resting for eons. They explained to me in a kind of thought language that they were fleeing from something out in space. They had to come to the planet Earth to escape their enemy. The creatures then showed me how they had created life on the planet in order to hide within the multitudinous forms and thus disguise their presence. Before me, the magnificence of plant and animal creation and speciation, hundreds of millions of years of activity, took place on a scale and with a vividness impossible to describe. I learned that the dragon-like creatures were thus inside of all forms of life, including man. They were the true masters of humanity and the entire planet, they told me. We humans were but the receptacles and servants of these creatures. For this reason, they could speak to me from within myself. These revelations, welling up from the depths of my mind, alternated with visions of the floating galley, which had almost finished taking my soul on board. The boat, with its blue jay-headed deck crew, was gradually drawing away, pulling my life force along as it headed toward a large fjord flanked by barren, worn hills. I knew I had only a moment more to live. Strangely, I had no fear of the bird-headed people. They were welcome to have my soul if they could keep it, but I was afraid that somehow my soul might not remain on the horizontal plane of the fjord, but might, through processes unknown but felt and dreaded, be acquired or reacquired by the dragon-like denizens of the depths. I suddenly felt my distinctive humanness, the contrast between my species and the ancient reptilian ancestors. I began to struggle against returning to the ancient ones, who were beginning to feel increasingly alien and possibly evil. Each heartbeat was a major undertaking. I turned to human help. With an unimaginable last effort, I barely managed to utter one word to the Indians. Medicine! I saw them rushing around to make an antidote, and I knew they could not prepare it in time. I needed a guardian who could defeat dragons, and I frantically tried to conjure up a powerful being to protect me against the alien reptilian creatures. One appeared before me, and at that moment the Indians forced my mouth open and poured the antidote into me. Gradually, the dragons disappeared back into the lower depths. The soul boat and the fjord were no more. I relaxed with relief. The antidote radically eased my condition, but did not prevent me from having many additional visions of a more superficial nature. These were manageable and enjoyable. I made fabulous journeys at will through distant regions, even out into the galaxy, created incredible architecture, and employed sardonically grinning demons to realize my fantasy. Often I found myself laughing aloud at the incongruities of my adventures. Finally, I slept. Rays of sunlight were piercing the holes in the palm thatched roof when I awoke. I was still lying on the bamboo platform, and I heard the normal morning sounds all around me. The Indians conversing, babies crying, and a rooster crowing. I was surprised to discover that I felt refreshed and peaceful. As I lay there, looking up at the beautiful woven pattern on the roof, the memories of the previous night drifted across my mind. I momentarily stopped myself from remembering more in order to get my tape recorder from a duffel bag. As I dug into the bag, several of the Indians greeted me, smiling. An old woman, Thomas's wife, gave me a bowl of fish and a plantain soup for breakfast. It tasted extraordinarily good. Then I went back to the platform, eager to put my night's experiences on tape before I forgot anything. The work of recall went easily, except for one portion of the trance that I could not remember. It remained blank, as though a tape had been erased. I struggled for hours to remember what had happened in that part of the experience, and I virtually wrestled it back into my consciousness. The recalcitrant material turned out to be the communication from the dragon-like creatures, including the revelation of their role in the evolution of life on this planet and their innate domination of living matter, including man. I was highly excited at rediscovering this material and could not help but feel that I was not supposed to be able to bring it back from the nether regions of my mind. I even had a peculiar sense of fear for my safety because I now possessed a secret that the creatures had indicated was only intended for the dying. I immediately decided to share this knowledge with others so that the secret would not reside with me alone and my life would not be in jeopardy. I put my outboard motor on a dugout canoe and left for an American evangelist mission station nearby. I arrived about noon. The couple at the mission, Bob and Millie, were a cut above the average evangelists sent from the United States. Hospitable, humorous, and compassionate. I told them my story. When I described the reptile with water gushing out of his mouth, they exchanged glances, reached for their Bible, and read to me the following line from chapter 12 in the book of Revelation. And the serpent cast out of his mouth water as a flood. They explained to me that the word serpent was synonymous in the Bible with the words dragon and Satan. I went on with my narrative. When I came to the part about the dragon-like creatures fleeing an enemy somewhere beyond the earth and landing here to hide from their pursuers, Bob and Millie became excited again, and again read me more from the same passage in the book of Revelation. And there was a war in heaven. Michael and his angels fought against the dragon, and the dragon fought and his angels, and prevailed not, neither was their place found any more in heaven. And the great dragon was cast out, that old serpent called the devil and Satan, which deceiveth the whole world. He was cast out into the earth, and his angels with him. I listened with surprise and wonder. The missionaries, in turn, seemed to be awed by the fact that an atheistic anthropologist, by taking the drink of the witch doctors, could apparently have revealed to him some of the same holy material in the book of Revelation. When I had finished my account, I was relieved to have shared my new knowledge, but I was also exhausted. I fell asleep on the missionaries' bed, leaving them to continue their discussion of the experience. That evening, as I returned to the village in my canoe, my head began to throb in rhythm with the noise of the outboard motor. I thought I was going mad. I had to stick fingers in my ears to avoid the sensation. I slept well, but the next day I noticed a numbness or pressure in my head. I was now eager to solicit a professional opinion from the most supernaturally knowledgeable of the Indians, a blind shaman who had made many excursions into the spirit world. A blind shaman who had made many excursions into the spirit world with the aid of the ayahuasca drink. It seemed only proper that a blind man might be able to be my guide to the world of darkness. I went to his hut, taking my notebook with me, and described my visions to him segment by segment. At first, I told him only the highlights. Thus, when I came to the dragon-like creatures, I skipped their arrival from space and only said there were these giant black animals, something like great bats, longer than the length of this house, who said that they were the true masters of the world. There is no word for dragon in Konibo, so giant bat was the closest I could come to describe what I had seen. He stared up toward me in his sightless eyes and said with a grin, "Oh, they're always saying that. But they are only the masters of outer darkness." He waved his hand casually towards the sky. I felt a chill along the lower part of my spine, for I had not yet told him that I had seen them in my trance coming from outer space. I was stunned. What I had experienced was already familiar to this barefoot, blind shaman, known to him from his own explorations of the same hidden world into which I had ventured. From that moment on, I decided to learn everything I could about shamanism. And there was something more that encouraged me in my new quest. After I recounted my entire experience, he told me that he did not know of anyone who had encountered and learned so much on his first ayahuasca journey. "You can surely be a master shaman," he said. Thus, my serious study of shamanism began. From the Gonibo, I especially learned about the journey into the lower world and the retrieval of spirits, methods that will be described later in the book. I returned to the United States in 1961, but 3 years later I came back to South America to be with the Jibaro, with whom I had lived in 1956 and 1957. My mission this time was not just to be an anthropologist, but to learn firsthand how to practice shamanism the Jibaro way. For that reason, I wanted to go to the northwestern part of the Jibaro country, where the most powerful shamans were reputed to reside. I first flew to Quito, Ecuador, and the Andean highlands. I took an old Junkers tri-motor down to a jungle airfield at the eastern base of the Andes on the Pastaza River. There, I chartered a single-engine plane to Macas, an ancient white settlement at the foot of the Andes in the midst of the Jibaro country. Macas was a strange village. It had been founded in 1599 by a handful of Spaniards who had survived the massacre of the legendary Sevilla del Oro by the Jibaro, and for centuries had been perhaps the most isolated community of the Western world. Until the airstrip was built in the 1940s, its most direct connection to the outside world had been a slippery footpath over the Andean escarpment west of the village, involving an arduous 8-day hike to reach the highland city of Riobamba. This isolation had created a white community unlike any other in the world. Even during the early years of the 20th century, the men hunted with blowguns, wore Indian dress, and proudly declared the direct descent from the conquistadores. They also had their own marvelous legends and private mysteries. For example, there was the story of how, after the massacre and the retreat from Sevilla de Oro, it took them almost a century to find a new way out over the Andes. The man who had finally succeeded was still remembered in bedtime stories to the children. And there was the spectral horse, complete with clinking chains, which was reportedly such a frequent night visitor to the streets of the village that the inhabitants often huddled inside the palm-thatched huts while the monster roamed about. His visits ended in 1924 when Catholic missionaries permanently settled into the community. At that time, incidentally, there was still no horses in Macas. The first one, a colt, was carried in on a man's back from Riobamba in 1928, almost 3.5 centuries after the community's founding. Up behind the village, surmounting the eastern Cordillera of the Andes, was Sangue, a great active volcano, snow-capped, billowing smoke by day and glowing by night. The glow, the Macabeos like to say, was produced by the treasure of the Incas, which they claimed was buried on the slopes of Sangue. My first day in Macas went well. My young Jibaro guide was awaiting me at the airstrip, and the people were hospitable and generous. Food was plentiful, and our meals included generous portions of meat. Since there was no way for the Macabeos To get their cattle over the Andes, they had to eat the beasts themselves. Thus, cattle were slaughtered in the little village every day. In addition, they gave me guayusa, a native tea, which the Macabeos consumed throughout the day instead of coffee. The tea created a sense of euphoria, and the entire local population was gently stoned all day. Guayusa is so habituating that before it is offered to a visitor, he is warned that once he drinks it, he will ever after always return to the Ecuadorian jungle. As I drifted off to sleep in Macas that night of my arrival, images in brilliant reddish hues appeared to me in the darkness of the Macabeo house. What I saw was most peculiar. Curvilinear designs intertwining, separating, and turning in a most enjoyable fashion. Then small, grinning demonic faces, which were also red, appeared among the changing patterns, swirling, disappearing, reappearing. I felt I was seeing the spiritual inhabitants of Macas. Suddenly, with an explosion and a jolt, I was almost thrown off my slat bed. The dogs of the village burst out barking. The visions, they vanished. People were shouting. An earthquake had shaken the ground, and now a spray of natural fireworks shot into the night sky from Sangre. I felt, undoubtedly, irrationally, that the sardonic demons had produced the eruption to greet my return to the jungle and to remind me of the reality. I laughed myself at the absurdity of it all. The next day, the Catholic missionary showed me his private collection of prehistoric posterds from the local area. On them were painted red designs almost identical to those I had seen the previous night. The following morning, my Jibaro guide and I walked northward from Macas, crossed the Rio Upano in a dugout canoe, and continued walking all day. At sunset, exhausted, we reached our destination, the house of a famous shaman, Akachu, deep in the forest. There was no guayusa that evening. Instead, I was proffered a bowl after bowl of refreshing manioc beer, monkey meat, and raw, squirming, but delicious cheese-like grubs. Tired but delighted to be back among shamans, I fell into a deep sleep on the bamboo bed. The morning Akachu, I sat formally, opposite each other. In the morning, Akachu and I sat formally, opposite each other on wooden stools, and as his wives brought us bowls of warmed manioc beer, his long black hair, bound into a ponytail with a woven red and white strap, from which a feathered tassel hung, showed streaks of gray. I guess he was in his 60s. I have come, I explained, to acquire spirit helpers, Sensak. Sensak is an important word to anybody who's not into anthropology. It's like little spirit darts, if anybody's curious. You'll see that a lot in shamanic cultures. I have come, I explained, to acquire spirit helpers, Sensak. He stared at me without saying a word, but the wrinkles in his brown face seemed to deepen. That is a fine gun there, he observed, jutting his chin toward the Winchester shotgun I had brought along for hunting. His message was clear, for the standard payment among the Jibaro for shamanic initiation was, at the very least, a muzzle-loading shotgun. The breech-loading, cartridge-using Winchester was far more powerful than the black powder muzzle-loaders, and thus much more valuable. To acquire knowledge and spirit helpers, I will give you the gun and my 2 boxes of cartridges, I said. Akachu nodded and reached his arm out in the direction of the Winchester. I picked up the gun and carried it over to him. He tested its weight and balance, and sighted along the barrel. Then abruptly, he laid the gun across his knees. First, you must bathe in the waterfall, he said. Then we will see. I told him I was ready to do whatever he said. You are not a Shuar, an Indian, Akachu said, so I do not know if you will have success, but I will help you try. He pointed westward toward the Andes with his chin, soon on the pilgrimage to the sacred waterfall. My Jibaro guide, his duties finished, had already gone home. The first day we followed a forest trail upstream along a twisting river valley. My companions kept up a very fast pace, and I was thankful when we at last stopped in late afternoon. Beside a small rapid in the river, Akachu and Sangu constructed a palm-thatched lean-to with a layer of palm fronds for our bed. I slept soundly, kept warm by the slow fire they built in the entrance of the shelter. The second day, our journey was almost a continuous climb upward into the mist-shrouded forest. As the virtually non-existent trail became more difficult, we paused at a grove of Ganya Brava to cut hiking staffs to help us in the ascent. Akachu briefly went off and returned with a 3-inch thick pole of balsa wood. While we rested, he quickly carved it with simple geometric designs and then handed it to me. "This is your magical staff," he said. "It will protect you from demons. If you encounter one, throw it at him. It is more powerful than a gun." I fingered the pole. It was extremely light and obviously would be of no use in defending myself against anything material. For a moment, I felt as though we were children playing a game of make-believe. Yet these men were warriors. Warriors who engaged in repeated life-and-death feuds and wars with their enemies. Didn't their survival depend upon being in genuine contact with reality? As the day progressed, the trail became steeper and more slippery. Often it seemed that I was sliding one step back in the adobe-like mud every 2 steps I made forward. We frequently rested to catch our breath and to sip water mixed with the manioc beer mash in our bottle-board canteens. Sometimes the others would snack on the smoked boiled manioc or smoked meat that they carried in their monkey skin pouches. I, however, was forbidden to eat solid food. "You must suffer," Sangu explained, "so that the grandfathers will take pity on you. Otherwise, the ancient specter will not come." That night, tired and hungry, I attempted to sleep in the palm-thatched lean-to my companions had constructed for us on the top of a cold, dank ridge. Shortly before dawn, it began to rain. Too chilled and miserable to stay where we were, we broke camp and groped in the dark along the ridge. The rain grew in intensity. Soon bolts of lightning, accompanied by explosions of thunder, periodically illuminated our way. Many of the lightning strikes seemed to be on the very ridge we were following, so we began to move at maximum speed in order to get off the heights. In the semi-darkness of the obscured dawn, I often lost sight of the other two, who were much more accustomed to the incredible pace they were setting through the forest. Even under normal circumstances, the Indians loped along at about 4 or 5 miles an hour. Now it seemed like 6. Soon, I lost sight of my companions entirely. I assumed they thought I could follow them. They would undoubtedly be waiting for me somewhere ahead beyond the end of the ridge. So I forged ahead, wet, tired, hungry, and fearful of being permanently lost in this great uninhabited forest. 1, 2, 3 hours passed, and I still did not encounter them. The rain let up, and the light in the deserted forest grew stronger. I looked for the sharply bent branches of saplings, the Indians' sign that they had passed that way, but without luck. I stopped, sat on a log in the middle of the dripping forest, and tried to think clearly about my position. I gave the Indians' special long-distance yell, a cry from the depths of the lungs that can be heard a half-mile away. 3 times I gave it. There was no answer. I was near panic. I did not have my gun, so hunting was impossible. I did not know where to go. The only humans that I knew of in the forest were my absent companions. I was aware that we had been headed generally west, but a dense forest canopy prevented me from seeing the direction of the sun. The ridge had numerous forks, so that I could not tell which one would be best to follow. Almost at random, I picked one ridge and followed it slowly, breaking branches every 10 feet or so to guide my companions if they came searching that way. From time to time I yelled, but heard no answering sound. I stopped at a stream and added some water to the concentrated beer in my calabash. As I rested, sweating, dozens of butterflies swirled about, often settling on my head, shoulders, and arms. I watched as they sucked the sweat from my skin and simultaneously urinated on it. I got up and went onward into the forest, supporting myself with the balsa staff. It was getting dark. With my puñal, or short machete, I cut branches from palm saplings and made a crude lean-to. Exhausted, I drank some beer, covered my body with fronds, and soon fell asleep. Faint light was filtering down through the canopy forest when I awoke. As I lay there in the green stillness, I heard a muffled boom. It caught me by surprise, and I could not ascertain its direction. I quietly listened for perhaps 15 minutes when another occurred off to my left. It was clearly a gun. I jumped and rushed off in the direction of the sound, running, stumbling, slipping as I skidded down steep slopes. From time to time I gave the long-distance yell. Another boom, this time slightly to my right. I veered course and soon found myself climbing down a precipitous canyon, clinging to vines and slipping from one sapling to another. I became aware of a pervasive roar, like a never-ceasing freight train. Abruptly, I was on the boulder-strewn shore of a river. About a quarter-mile upstream, a stupendous waterfall was hurtling over a bare rock cliff, and near its base I could see my companions. At that moment, they were my closest friends in all the world. I had to clamber up and down immense river boulders and force the pools of water that lay between sandbars. As I got near, I felt the mists of the waterfall carried down the canyon on the wind, cooling my face and arms. It took me about 15 minutes to reach Akachu and Sangu. Finally, I collapsed on the sand beside my companions. "We thought a demon might have gotten you," said Akachu with a grin. I smiled back weakly, glad to accept the canteen of beer he offered. "You are tired," he said. "That is good, for the grandfathers may take pity on you. You must now start to bathe." He pointed to my staff. "Bring your balsa and come with me." While Sangu sat on the sandbar, Akachu led me over to the rocks along the edge of the great pool into which the cascade poured. Soon we were up against the wet cliff face as drenching sprays pelted our bodies. He took my hand and inched forward along the base of the cliff. The water poured with mounting strength upon us, making it difficult to avoid being swept away. I supported myself with my staff with one hand and hung onto Akachu with the other. Each step forward became more difficult. Then suddenly we were underneath the waterfall in a dark, natural recess. It seemed like a magical cave. Light entered only through the immense sheet of falling water, which sealed us in from the rest of the world. The incessant roar of the cascade was greater than even that of my first vision years before. It seemed to penetrate my whole being. We were sealed from the world by the basic elements of earth and water. "The house of the grandfathers," Akachu shouted in my ear. He pointed to my staff. He had told me earlier what to do. I began to walk back and forth in the incredible chamber, putting my staff before me with each step. As instructed, I continuously shouted, "Tao! Tao! Tao!" to attract the attention of the grandfathers. I was thoroughly chilled from the spray that swept the small cave, water which not long before had been reposing in the glacial lakes of the highest Andes. I shivered, paced, and shouted. Akachu accompanied me, but without a staff. Gradually, strange calm pervaded my consciousness. I no longer felt cold, tired, or hungry. The sounds of the cascading water grew more and more distant and seemed strangely soothing. I felt that this was where I belonged, that I had come home. The wall of falling water became iridescent, a torrent of millions of liquid prisms. As they went by, I had the continuous sensation of floating upward, as though they were stable and I was the one in motion. Flying inside a mountain! I laughed at the absurdity of the world. Finally, Akachu grasped my shoulder, stopped me, and took my hand. He led me out of the magic mountain, back along the cliff, and to Sangu. I was sorry to leave the sacred place. When we had regrouped on the sandbar, Sangu led us directly to the side of the canyon and commenced scaling the steep slope. We followed single file, grasping at projecting roots, saplings, and vines to keep ourselves from sliding backward in the wet clay. For perhaps an hour we continued the arduous ascent, occasionally drenched by the wafting spray from the waterfall. It was late afternoon when we finally reached the small flat ridge adjacent to the rim of the cascade. We rested briefly and then followed Sangu along the plateau. At first the jungle growth was thick and difficult to penetrate, but shortly we found ourselves in a gallery of immense trees. After about 5 minutes, Sangu stopped and started to cut boughs for a lean-to. Akachu began slitting a stick at one end. He split the same end a second time, at a right angle to the first cut, and stuck the unsplit end into the ground. Into the crosswise split he pushed 2 twigs, which forced the end open into a 4-pronged receptacle. Then he took a fist-sized gourd cup from his monkey skin shoulder bag and set it into the space formed by the prongs. He reached again into his pouch and brought forth a bundle of short green stems. They were the maikua, a brugmansia species of datura, plant cuttings he had collected prior to our departure from his house. One by one he held the stems over the gourd cup and scraped off the green bark. When he had finished, the cup was almost full. He reached in, drew out the shavings, and began squeezing the grain juice into the cup. Within 5 minutes there was about 1/8 of a cup of the liquid. He threw away the shavings. Now we would let the makua cool, he said. When night comes, you will drink it. You alone will drink, for we must guard you. We will be with you at all times, so do not fear. Sangu had joined us, and now he added, what is most important is that you must have no fear. If you see something frightening, you must not flee. You must run up and touch it. The Akachu grasped my shoulder. That is right. You must do that, or one day soon you will die. Hold your balsa at all times in your hands so that you can do the touching. I began to feel a strong sense of panic. Not only were their words somewhat less than comforting, but I had heard that persons sometimes died or permanently lost their minds from taking maikua. I also remembered stories of Hibaro, who had taken makua and become so delirious that they had dashed wildly through the forest to fall from cliffs or to drown. For this reason, they never took makua without sober companions to restrain them. Will you hold me down strongly, I asked. That will be done, brother, said Akachu. It was the first time he addressed me by a kinship term, and that one word reassured me. Still, as I waited for the dark, rising anticipation and curiosity were mixed with fear. My companions did not make a fire, and as night came, we were all stretched out side by side on palm fronds, listening to the stillness of the forest and the distant roar of the waterfall. At last, the time came. Akachu gave me the gourd cup. I tipped it up and swallowed the contents. The taste was somewhat disagreeable, yet slightly similar to green tomatoes. I felt a numbing sensation. I thought of that other drink 3 years before among the Conibo, which had led me here. Was my shamanic quest worth the danger? Shortly, however, even quasi-logical thought vanished as an inexpressible terror rapidly permeated my whole body. My companions were going to kill me! I must get away! I attempted to jump up, but instantly they were upon me. 3, 4, and an infinity of savages wrestled with me, forced me down, down, down. Their faces were above me, contorted into sly grins. Then blackness. I was awakened by a flash of lightning, followed by a thunderous explosion. The ground beneath me was shaken. I jumped up utterly in panic. A hurricane-like wind threw me back down on the ground. I stumbled again to my feet. A stinging rain pelted my body as the wind ripped at my clothes. Lightning and thunder exploded all around. I grasped at a sapling to support myself. My companions were nowhere to be seen. Suddenly, about 200 feet away amidst the tree trunks, I could see a luminous form floating slowly toward me. I watched, terrified as it grew larger and larger, resolving itself into a twisting form. The gigantic, writhing reptilian form floated directly toward me. Its body shone in brilliant hues of greens, purples, and reds. As it twisted amidst the lightning and thunder, it looked at me with a strange, sardonic smile. I turned to run, and then remembered the boss's staff. I looked down, but I could not see it. The serpentine creature was now only 20 feet and towering above me, coiling and uncoiling. It separated into two overlapping creatures. They were now both facing me. The dragons had come to take me away. They coalesced back into one. I saw before me a stick about a foot long. I grabbed it and desperately charged the monster with my stick, outstretched before me. An ear-splitting scream filled the air, and abruptly the forest was empty. The monster was gone. There was only silence and serenity, and I lost consciousness. When I awoke, it was midday. Akachu and Sangu were squatting beside a small fire, eating and conversing quietly. My head ached and I was hungry, but otherwise, I felt all right. As I sat up, my friends rose and came over. Akachu gave me a bowl of warmed beer. I was also given a piece of dried monkey meat. The food tasted wonderful, but I wanted to share my experience with my friends. I said, I thought you were trying to kill me last night. Then you disappeared and there was tremendous lightning. Akachu interrupted me. You must not tell anyone, even us, what you have encountered. Otherwise, all your suffering will have been in vain. Some day, and you will know when that is, you can tell others, but not now. Eat, and then we will start for home. We went back to Akachu's house, and with his guidance, I began to acquire the sensac, magical darts, essential to the practice of Hibaro shamanism. These sensac, or spirit helpers, are the main powers believed to cause and cure illness in daily life. To the non-shaman, they are normally invisible, and even shamans can perceive them only in an altered state of consciousness. That's another important word. Altered state of consciousness. Bad or bewitching shamans send these spirit helpers into victims' bodies to make them ill or to kill them. Good shamans or healers use their own sensac to help them suck out spirits from the bodies of ill tribesmen. The spirit helpers also form shields which, along with the shaman's guardian spirit power, protect their shaman masters from attacks. A new shaman collects all kinds of insects, plants, and other objects, which become his spirit helpers. Almost any object, including living insects and worms, can become a sensac if it is small enough to be swallowed by a shaman. Different types of sensac cause or are used to cure different kinds of degrees of illness. The greater the variety of these power objects that a shaman has in his body, the greater his ability as a doctor. Each sensac has an ordinary and non-ordinary aspect. The magical dart's ordinary aspect is an ordinary material object, as seen without drinking ayahuasca. But the non-ordinary and the true aspect of the sensac is revealed to the shaman by taking the drink. When he does this, the magical darts appear in their hidden forms as spirit helpers, such as giant butterflies, jaguars, serpents, birds, and monkeys, who actively assist the shaman in his tasks. When a healing shaman is called in to treat a patient, his first task is diagnosis. He drinks ayahuasca, green tobacco water, and sometimes the juice of a plant called piripiri in the late afternoon and early evening. The consciousness-changing substances permit him to see into the body of the patient as though it were glass. If the illness is due to sorcery, the healing shaman will see the intruding non-ordinary entity within the patient's body clearly enough to determine whether he possesses the appropriate spirit helper to extract it by sucking. The shaman sucks magical darts from a patient's body at night and in a dark area of the house, for it is only in the darkness that he can perceive non-ordinary reality. With the setting of the sun, he alerts his sensac by whistling the tune of his power song. After about a quarter of an hour, he starts singing. When he is ready to suck, the shaman keeps 2 sensac of the type identical to the one he has seen in the patient's body, in the front and rear of his mouth. They are present in both their material and non-material aspects, and are there to catch the non-ordinary aspect of the magical dart when the shaman sucks it out of the patient's body. The scent sac nearest the shaman's lips has the task of incorporating the sucked out essence within itself. If, however, this non-ordinary essence should get past it, the second spirit helper in the mouth blocks the throat so that the intruder cannot enter the interior of the shaman's body and do him harm. Trapped thus within the mouth, the essence is shortly caught by and incorporated into the material substance of one of the curing shaman's sensak. He then vomits out this object and displays it to the patient and his family, saying, "Now I have sucked it out. Here it is." The non-shamans may think that the material object itself is what has been sucked out, and the shaman does not disillusion them. At the same time, he is not lying, because he knows that the only important aspect of a sensak is its non-material or non-ordinary aspect, or essence, which he sincerely believes he has removed from the patient's body. To explain to the layman that he already had these objects in his mouth would serve no fruitful purpose and would prevent him from displaying such an object as proof that he had effected the cure. The ability of a shaman to suck depends largely upon the quantity and strength of his own sensak, of which he may have hundreds. His magical darts assume their supernatural aspect as spirit helpers when he is under the influence of ayahuasca, and he sees them as a variety of zoomorphic forms hovering over him, perching on his shoulders, and sticking out of his skin. He sees them helping to suck the patient's body. He drinks tobacco water every few hours to keep them fed so they will not leave him. The healing shaman may have sensaks sent at him by a bewitcher. Because of this danger, shamans may repeatedly drink tobacco water at all hours of the day and night. The tobacco water helps keep one sensak ready to repel any other magical darts. A shaman does not even go for a walk without taking along the green tobacco leaves with which he prepares the water that keeps his spirit helpers alert. The degree of violence and competition in Jivaro society is famous in the anthropological literature and contrasts radically, for example, with the peacefulness of the Conibo. And both the Jivaro and the Conibo stand apart from Australian and many other tribal peoples who have long practiced shamanism without employing psychedelics. Still, Jivaro shamanism is highly developed, dramatic, and exciting. So in 1969, I again returned, filling in gaps in my knowledge, and in 1973, I engaged in more shamanic practice with them. During the years since beginning shamanic work among the Conibo, I have also studied briefly with shamans of a few Western North American Indian groups, the Wintun and Pomo in California, Coast Salish in Washington State, and the Lakota Sioux in South Dakota. From them, I learned how shamanism could be practiced successfully without the use of ayahuasca or other drugs of the Conibo and the Jivaro. This knowledge has been especially useful in introducing Westerners to the practice of shamanism. Finally, I learned from the worldwide ethnographic literature on shamanism, where lie buried many gems of information that supplement and reaffirm what I had been taught firsthand. Now it seems time to help transmit some practical aspects of this ancient human legacy to those who have been cut off from it for centuries. Whew. Wow. That was a reading, and I would not be mad if people did not stick around for the full thing. But that is wild to hear. That's chapter 2, and for my class called Modern Shamanism, it's a summer semester. It lasts the entire month of June. I have to read this book, and that's just one of the stories out of 25 that I will be experiencing. And if you guys like that, maybe I will read a few more chapters for you guys. Thank you. This was my TED Talk. And I'll see you